Good evening, I'm Katerina Georgieva. For the first time in 20 months, the U.S. land border is open to Canadians.
I am crossing to go visit my boyfriend. We've been together almost 6 years, but the last 2 years have been complicated, to say the least.
Oh, it's been tough. I mean, we've been experiencing the same thing as you, I believe. We've talked to Canadian friends, but we haven't seen Canadian friends.
This is our drive-through COVID testing operation. We've been around since August of 2020 and testing people out here.
A huge issue that I see that seems to be un-Canadian to me is the fact that we're putting a price tag on crossing the border.
Hopefully they don't change it and put more burden on the drivers. That's the only thing. If it's going to cost me money to drive you across the border, well, then why bother?
And there's a live look at the Ambassador Bridge. They're the busiest land border crossing in North America. And today, a step toward normalcy. If you're a fully vaccinated Canadian, you can now cross that bridge or take the Detroit-Windsor tunnel to cross the border for any reason you like, not just essential reasons. It puts the cross back into our cross-border city. And our Chris Ensing did just that. He took the tunnel over to Detroit, and he's been there all day, and he joins us now live. Chris, what has it been like today?
It's a pretty wild day, Kat. I've stared at Detroit from the shoreline of the Detroit River for most of this pandemic, wondering when the day would come when we'd be able to cross over for any reason. That day is today. Fully vaccinated Canadians able to get in. We went through the Detroit tunnel. Now, the big problem here is getting back, and that's that test that you need, a negative COVID-19 test in order to get into Canada. We'll talk about that in a second. That big push, though, is getting into the United States. Fully vaccinated Canadians are allowed to cross. You have to have proof of vaccination on you, but the border agent may not ask for it. They didn't ask for ours when we went across, just asked if we were vaccinated. And when we made it across, we found out that there were people who were waiting for Canadians on the other side. But we did hear a lot about this PCR test, the need for a negative COVID-19 to get back COVID-19 test to get back into Canada. So we went over to a couple places where you could figure out how to get that done. Now, I got my test at a clinic in Windsor. It cost me $225, and I needed to return within 72 hours of getting that test. There's drive-through clinics that have been popping up in Michigan where you can go through and at the price of $75 American, get that test result within the same day. And that allows you to go back into Canada. Now, we asked how many of these are available throughout the area so that people knew what their options were when we spoke with the person who runs one of the centers this afternoon.
Today we're offering PCR testing, and so we're offering same-day results for people to show up before noon. If they show up afternoon, it'll typically still show up by midnight, if not early the next morning. In about a week, we'll have the rapid PCR-based testing, or the NAT test, as people call it, and that'll be results in 15 to 30 minutes.
And you've worked with the border to make sure that both of those tests are good enough for people to try to get back into Canada?
Correct, yeah. We've been looking at all the rules and regulations to make sure we're in line with that.
Now, there's about 30 of those types of clinics that are set up here throughout the Detroit area. Now, I did speak with one woman, Lauren Hedges, who you heard earlier in the program talking about how she's excited to go and see her boyfriend. She's crossing over for a month. It took her a matter of minutes to get through. She then found her boyfriend. They're together again. And she says that she'll worry about the test when she has to come back, but hopes it's still not a requirement when she makes her way back to Canada in December. Kat?
Now, Chris, you spoke with a number of people today. What else are you hearing about these tests?
Just the prohibitive nature of it all. We went for lunch at Nemo's. It's a spot that many people in the Windsor area might know, especially if you've gone over for a Wings game or watched the Lions play, the Detroit Tigers, any of the sports events. We asked them what they're missing. Now, we heard about the pandemic, and to be honest, the pandemic is different over here. No masks when you're inside. Nobody's asked me for proof of vaccination, so it does feel different to be in Michigan during this health crisis. But I asked the manager, Pat Osmond, what this has been like without the Canadians, and he talked about how he misses people that were regulars, routine trips across that they would take, now not something part of their daily plans because they know that they're going to have to take a costly test in order to get back into Canada. It's only been one day, so I asked him what it's been like so far. Here's what he told me.
The day tripper and the lunch person, which we had a lot of, we were very lucky with a lot of good, loyal, daily customers that were Canadians. I don't think we're going to see them for a while until that all changes. Because if you're going to come for a vacation, you can do it. If you're going to come for a weekend, maybe you have to think about it. But if you're going to come for lunch, you throw $200 on top of lunch. That's tough.
It is tough for some people, so the idea of crossing just isn't on their mind. Now, the other thing is that today is a Monday. We could see those crossings increase on a day like Friday, where you can get more bang for your buck out of that COVID-19 test. Now, for me and Mike Evans, who's the videographer for this trip, we got to find our way back to Canada later this evening, and we'll tweet about how that goes. That will be the real test of this new system. Kat?
Thanks for this, Chris. The CBC's Chris Ensing reporting from Detroit, and we will meet up with Chris again a little later in the show. Several mayors of Canadian border towns, including Windsor's Drew Dilkins, are joining forces to call for an end to COVID-19 test requirements for travelers. They argue that the test impedes a return to tourism on both sides of the border and disrupts family reunification.
And so now there's a pathway to cross, yet that pathway is dampened by an unreasonable and costly requirement for a PCR test to return to Canada. And this PCR test requirement is a hard stop barrier for families to reunite, except for the wealthiest of Canadians, and that is unfair.
Now, as Chris mentioned in his earlier reporting, when entering Canada, no matter how short their trip, travelers must present a negative pre-arrival molecular COVID-19 test. These are usually PCR tests, which can cost anywhere from $75 to $300. Some medical experts say the Canadian government should consider replacing this requirement with a more convenient and cheaper antigen test, though they are generally less reliable, but can be done shortly before a traveler enters Canada. And now that the land border is open to non-essential trips, there's some confusion among cab drivers who take people across. Some are wondering whether they would be subject to the COVID-19 testing requirement when re-entering Canada, like most people would. The CBC's Jason Veal went for a cab ride to find out.
My first name is Marwan Abuzini. I am the chairperson for the Vets Cab unit with Unifor Local 195. At times, yes, I do drive on a regular basis. 2 weeks ago, I had a driver calling me and asking me about it. I said, what's the story? He said he was asked to provide a PCR test. And he ended up going back and doing a PCR test and spending the night there because he couldn't get the results right away. And came across the next day. He had to pay for it out of his own pocket. Altogether about $300. Wow. That's one case, you know, but then other drivers that have crossed and had no issue coming back to the country or to the city. As a cab driver, I'm deemed as essential driver.
So what happens now that the borders are open for non-essential trips?
Well, the driver has to get in the car, drive his customer wherever they wish, and make sure he does not leave the cab. Because the second the driver gets out of the cab, that puts him under a lot of liability there. Then he has to declare that, yes, I stopped at such a place and did. Then they require a PCR. That's one of the questionnaire that the officers would ask you.
Right.
They'll ask you if you stopped anywhere along your ride or your trip. So best way is go from point A to point B, turn back and come back to point A without stopping anywhere.
Many Windsor musicians are singing from the same song sheet when it comes to the testing requirements to enter Canada. For entertainers whose work relies on smoothly crossing the border, the required PCR test hits a sour note.
I mean, a huge issue that I see that seems to be un-Canadian to me is the fact that we're putting a price tag on crossing the border. And in so many regions in this country, particularly this one, we have family and friends over across the border. And, you know, we've kind of all done our part at this point, and we want to see those family and friends. And it's just sort of like, if you don't have enough money, you can't go. I think we're putting an unnecessary wealth gap now. There's a border there, yes, we need to manage that. But there needs to be freedom for us to communicate and exchange with each other. And the current regulations don't encourage that, and also don't really very well take into account what we've all been through collectively. Simply when I crossed the border for the first time, I wept. There's been many tearful reunions of just coming into contact with musicians over there and friends over there. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years, so.
CBC News is just learning that a Windsor mom who had been separated from her children for more than 2 years has been reunited with them. Her 2 eldest children were taken to Lebanon by their father in 2019, and Kala Khalifa has been fighting to get them back since then. In a call with CBC, Khalifa said, "It's indescribable. It's something I've been dreaming about, for the past 2.5 years. And I can't even explain with words. I'm overwhelmed with joy." The children landed at Pearson Airport last night. An inmate from Windsor's Southwest Detention Center is on the loose after 3 inmates were improperly released from the prison last month. According to provincial officials, 2 of the 3 have been returned to custody, but the Ministry of the Solicitor General is working with police to find the 3rd. The ministry says an internal investigation will take place to figure out the cause and how to stop it from happening again. The ministry would not say whether any of the released inmates were in prison for violent offenses. Today is Indigenous Veterans Day, the day we honor the contributions and the sacrifices of Indigenous veterans. Dr. Judy Peters heads up the veterans group on Walpole Island First Nation and served in the U.S. military. Peters will be holding a ceremony there on Wednesday.
It is a way of commemorating all of the ones who've gone before. The people who came from our reserve to fight for Canada or the United States, they fought for our right to exist. They fought for our right to stand with our own flag and have our own community. I'm from a long family of veterans, so I follow in their footsteps too.
Peters will be lowering the flags and doing the ceremony by herself. Others can drop off wreaths throughout the day. Meanwhile, the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 594 in LaSalle held its own special ceremony yesterday for the branch, where First Nations veterans were also acknowledged. The Legions are also selling special lapel pins featuring a poppy set on a dream catcher. It also features 2 feathers, a Métis sash, and an Inukshuk.
There's been all kinds of our First Nations veterans at remembrance services in downtown Windsor, in LaSalle, across the country. But the last few years, we've been making an extra effort to make sure that they're included and make sure that they know they're included in our thoughts and our prayers and our thanks for all the stuff that they've done over the years.
The flags here are already at half-mast, and they'll be lowered once again on Thursday. The pins can be purchased at the Legion. In just a matter of days, the local Humane Society received more than 100 cats. A good number of those were surrendered by 3 hoarders. The unexpected influx of cats has left the agency in a less than perfect situation. It's appealing to the public to either foster or adopt some of the kittens.
Well, we wanted to put a little bit of a message out there because last week we did see our intake up a little bit, and it was for a variety of reasons. We're still seeing kittens come in. We also had a lot of surrenders last week. So we wanted to remind people that it really helps to coordinate intake and give us a call before they bring an animal in. The number of animals is pretty consistent in terms of how many cats we've taken in this year. It's about 3,400. And that is down from a couple years ago. 2020 was a little bit of an unusual year in sheltering, so we compared to 2019. So we are down, but definitely we're seeing a little bit of a spike right now. So we're encouraging people to consider adoption, considering fostering if they've never done it before. Really, it is both. We need people to support us in a variety of ways. If people are looking to adopt, it's a great adoption package. Really consider looking for an animal to adopt. But if you're looking for a temporary animal, then fostering can be a great opportunity because you can help them on their path to a new home.
An unseasonably warm fall after a hot, dry summer has many farmers in Manitoba worried. A lot of the moisture, which is essential to their crops, has been depleted from the ground. As Marina von Stackelberg reports, they need some rain now or a lot of snow this winter for their next growing season to be saved.
Dairy farmer David Wiens has never dealt with a drought like this. His family has been raising cows for 3 generations.
The cows are the absolute priority, and if we can't get feed for our cows, then we would simply have to reduce the herd, and of course then you're reducing production, and no one wants to go there.
For now, Wiens counts himself lucky. He's still able to feed his herd.
We'll still be okay that way for this winter, but it's going to be close. Now, our really big concern at this point is, well, you can see how dry it is outside.
Dry weather that's plagued the prairies since the summer. A drought so severe, farmers couldn't grow crops to feed their animals. The price to buy feed went through the roof. Some sold their livestock off. And now any moisture left in the soil is pretty well gone. Snow is needed, and lots of it.
If the system isn't recharged, then very likely we're going to have a real crop disaster on our hands. Not just a crop disaster, but it's going to be a disaster for the entire economy.
The amount of water flowing through Manitoba's Assiniboine River is half of what it should be for this time of year. Rivers and lakes across the province are reporting historic water lows, and it's not getting any better.
If we do not get an above average snowfall this winter, we are going to be in terrible shape come spring. You would have to go back to the 1930s to see something this severe.
Wiens says farms are much better at dealing with drought than they were in the Great Depression. They can weather bad seasons, but he worries what will happen if this continues. Climate change is making it harder to know what the future looks like.
One wonders, is this a new normal, or is this another one of those cycles?
Despite the uncertainty, he's optimistic rain and snow will come. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, near Grunthal, Manitoba.
The UN Climate Conference in Glasgow is in its final week of talks as delegates from various nations try to reach common ground. But many others no longer see global warming as a crisis to avert, but one that is the new normal. And they are calling on world leaders to start planning for ways to adapt to a changing climate. Here's more from senior meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff, who is part of the CBC team at COP26.
Adaptation, loss, and damage was the theme of COP26 today, often called the litmus test of COP26. And that's because for decades now, island nations, developing countries, those at the forefront of seeing the greatest impacts of climate change, calling for this topic to be on the top of the agenda rather than a side issue. So far, so much of the big announcements have been about mitigation, moving away from fossil fuels, rather than adapting to the changes we know will happen. And indeed, back in Paris, it was the island nations coming together to demand that the agreement said to keep warming below 1.5 degrees, not that 2, which is why 1.5 alive has been such a theme over this conference. Coming out today, 2 tandem studies backed by the UN showing just how much impact we will see from 1.5 warming. By just 2030, half of the world's population expected to see climate hazards like flooding, extreme temperatures, and water stresses. If we can't keep that temperature below 2 degrees, we'll add another 800 million to that number. It's not just the developing world, though. Canada seeing climate warming, our country 2 to 3 times faster in the north than anywhere else in the world.
Today, when various nations around the world are getting together and making promises and pledges about what they're going to do to help people cope with the impacts of climate change, as we see that filter down to action at the national level, and the municipal level, now it starts to affect homeowners where, instead of having your basement flooded, perhaps it isn't because your municipality worked with your federal government and put in place the infrastructure needed to prevent that harm.
He went on to say that does seem to be the theme of the successes so far, making grounds with adaptation, not necessarily with mitigation. But we'll see where things all end up. 4 more days still to go. Johanna Wagstaff, CBC News, Glasgow.
All right, we're giving you a live look there of the Renaissance Center, a different view of that building than what we've been used to for the last 20 months from across the river. But today, Chris Ensing, he is there right now. He's been bringing us all the coverage from this first day of the border reopening since March of 2020. And we'll hear more from Chris later in the program. But before that, Colette Kennedy will be here right after the break with your full weather forecast. Lots coming up. Stay with us. Colette Kennedy is here now for a look at our weather forecast. Colette, I took a walk earlier today and it was warmer than what I expected for early November.
Yes, we're just barely one day over a week into November. This is kind of unusual weather, I would say. And then, you know, what a difference a weekend makes too, in the sense that normally I'm here and, you know, we'd be seeing the sun setting now. Well, it's set at 5:18 because, of course, things changed. So we're getting into more sun earlier, but darker earlier as well. So daytime highs today, this is where we reached. We peaked at 18 degrees, so just a gorgeous one. Current temperatures, once that sun does set, the temperatures drop back, but still above seasonal. 12 degrees currently, but will be above seasonal overnight tonight. And then when we look at the satellite, you're still seeing clear conditions. And we stay this way for part of the overnight hours, but there's cloud deck that is going to be approaching. That mild air has been thanks to that clockwise circulation around high pressure, counterclockwise around low pressure. So you have the two together, and that's been pushing in that milder air in our direction. But that cloud cover will be increasing overnight tonight, becoming nearly overcast as we go towards tomorrow morning. Some areas of fog developing as well, and then a chance to get into a few light showers into the afternoon and evening hours. But then the system will kind of make haste and be moving back out of here by late tomorrow evening. So setting us up Wednesday for sunshine coming back again. So tomorrow's kind of that in-between day with grayer skies, and have the umbrella handy, although we shouldn't see much. In fact, a trace to maybe a millimeter or so. There are those overnight lows. Sarnia especially mild tonight at 7. Allow some extra time tomorrow morning for the commute because of areas of reduced visibility there. And I've put rain showers on all these icons, but again, there's not a lot to this one, all right? If you're one of those people who are like, I don't need an umbrella, well, you could get by. Into Wednesday, there's the sun coming back. Mild temperatures prevail until we get into the weekend, and then things are going to cool back down, especially those nights and early mornings.
And yet during the week, still double digits.
Yep, we're doing pretty good for a few days yet.
Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
When we come back, Chris Ensing is still on the other side of the river. He's in Detroit, so we're going to check back in with him right after the break. A busy day at the border today as the U.S. opened its land crossing to Canadians for the first time in 20 months. Chris Ensing is back with us once again from Detroit. Chris, you're about to return to Windsor, so how have you prepared for the crossing?
Yeah, Kat, in order to get back to Windsor, we needed to have a negative COVID-19 test. So we took care of that in Windsor before we left. If your trip's under 72 hours, you can do that with a PCR test on the other side of the border. And so we'll go to the tunnel, which is what we'll use, and we'll come across and we'll see what that process is like. And we'll tweet about that and show people what that's like. Just to sum up this day, though, I want to talk about sort of the essential purpose that this border has played in people's lives, specifically around love. We've heard from so many people separated just across the Detroit River. And Kat, I know you saw this too. I think we saw it together on walks. People with signs who used to wave, they'd have balloons on the Windsor side of the border for people who are standing here right now to show them that they love them. And now they have an opportunity to come across, but they believe that that test for some is just too expensive to make it across. Now we'll see. Politicians are calling for change, and that will be a big part of the story moving forward. But this is the reopening of America for Canadians who are fully vaccinated, and it's a big day that's being felt by people here. Kat.
Thanks so much for this, Chris, for all your coverage today. That's the CBC's Chris Ensing. And that is it for CBC Windsor News. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.